so much. So we're continuing with our summer series on the theme of love, because there's way too much hate out there, hate going around. So we need to send in our love, along with our tithes and offerings, right away. Now, ordinarily, we'll always have a manuscript that I preach from. But today, it's about parables. And one thing I have realized about the parables of Jesus is that you cannot explain them. Folks have been trying to explain what they mean for centuries and centuries. And I think that's because it's a living word that means different things to different folks throughout time, depending on the situation that folks are facing. And so today I just wanted to talk a little bit about parables. They do follow a pattern. They do tend to defy explanation. They disrupt our thinking. They end in a way that's twisted or upside down like you weren't expecting.
Exactly.
Now, musician Leonard Cohen sang a song, and one of the verses was that there's a crack in everything, but that's where the light gets in.
All right.
So, sometimes I think parables are like that. You see, God's kingdom is not some faraway place that we got to travel to, light years. God's kingdom is right here among us, right here surrounding us. Separated by a very thin veil. We just don't see it because we're looking with the world's eyes. We're looking through eyes that are saying, what can I get out of this? And it's only when we get the I want out of the way that I love becomes the way. This hate going around, where do you think that comes from? That comes from, I want to take, there's only so much, and I want to get what I can get. Well, Jesus was a disruptor, and he came right along and said, it's not like that. So I thought I'd talk about a couple of these things, and then a couple more modern day parables. First of all, on the cover of your bulletin is a picture of a tree. And I don't know what happened. So the folks on Zoom at home, I'll show you. Right? Y'all on Facebook, you can see it too. So, this tree is not here at the church. This tree is outside my study at home. And I look out and I see this tree all year round. It's not a mustard tree. It's not one of the cedars of Lebanon. It's not a cypress. It's an ash tree. And it's been infected with that emerald ash borer that's going around killing all the ash trees around the city. And I've called the city to see if they'll come take it down, because there's so much dead in here. There's so many dead branches in here. And if you see it in the wintertime, you think, what's that dead tree doing there? But for some reason, this tree just keeps on growing and growing and growing and growing. And every year it comes back and there's more leaves on it. And in the wintertime, when you look at the thing and think, what's that dead tree? You'll see up in there little bunches of leaves where the squirrels have made their nests. Now, I don't know how squirrels live up in the trees in those little leafy nests throughout the winter. They're a lot stronger skin than I have. But the tree, even though it's dead, there's birds hanging out in it all the time. There's squirrels living in it to stay safe from the other stuff that's going to get them. It's doing just what Jesus described the mustard tree would do. It just keeps on growing and growing and growing. And I still call the alderman and say, will you please have this tree? At least trim. You don't have to cut it down, but at least trim away the dead stuff. Well, it's been 3 or 4 years and it hasn't happened yet, so we'll see. It's a different alderman than the one here, so don't worry, I won't name any names. I thought I'd talk a little bit about farming too. This first parable of the farmer sure makes it sound like farming is easy business, right? They scatter the seed, they sleep night and day. When it's ready, they go out and harvest it. Well, growing up on a farm, I can tell you that is not what farm life is like. Farm, we're working every day, sun up to sundown. There's constant work on the farm. Now, at planting season and harvest season, you're extra busy, right? That's when you got the lights on the tractors and the combines, because you're trying to get it all done, and you're trying to get the corn and the wheat and the beans in before it rains while they still stay dry, because you can't get as much for your crops if they're wet. Oh, so it's a lot of work. And I think that this parable, while it shows that it's God who gives the growth, right? God is always making things grow. I mean, this planet and all the stuff we do to destroy this planet, it just keeps growing. Stuff just keeps growing and growing and growing back. And we are not the ones responsible for that. That growth comes from God, and God is love. That's why I say it's love that makes the trees grow, that makes the crops grow, that makes the birds fly in the air, that sets the stars in their place.
Great.
It's love. And yet, we do have a part to play. The farmer still goes out and sows the seeds. The farmer still goes and reaps the harvest. Right? The vineyard keeper still has to go out and prune and care for the vines, and then the grapes come in. We have a part to play, and yet we are not the ones that make the stuff grow. I'd like to tell you about another parable, so to speak. I read about this story this morning in the paper. And it's the story of a man named Basim Razo. He lives in Iraq. He's an engineer, an Iraqi engineer. And in 2015, coalition forces dropped a bomb on his house, thinking it was a car bomb factory. But really it was this engineer's house, and it killed everyone in his family. His wife in the bed next to him, of course he was severely wounded but survived. His daughter, everyone else in the house died. And later, now the U.S. never admitted this, but I believe it was a Dutch pilot who actually dropped the bomb and has been haunted to this day with the knowledge now that there were innocent civilians in that house. It wasn't a bomb-making factory. Now, the natural reaction would be, to vow revenge, to get back, to become bitter, to hate the people who did that. Well, Mr. Razo instead works to build bridges. He works with university students around the world to let them know a little bit more about what Iraq is really like, and to create empathy and trust among nations. Now finally the Dutch pilot apologized, and Mr. Razo sent back a very nice reply. You're a soldier, you're acting under orders, you didn't know what it was, you were doing what you're supposed to do, I forgive you. The U.S. has never acknowledged that that happened or admitted that civilians were killed in that event. And yet, think of everything that went into that, and this man's response is love and bridge building and empathy. That's God's kingdom. No matter if you're Muslim or Christian, God's kingdom is everywhere. And reversals happen all the time. That's how the Lord works. I'd like to tell you another parable, and this is a quote from a biblical scholar named Emerson Powley, who writes African American Bible commentaries, which are helpful for me to read. And I just want to give a quote, one sentence here, where he's talking about this parable. And he says, analogously, one would never imagine a liberation struggle that began with a few escaped slaves would lead to insurrections that led to the abolitionist movement, that led to the Civil War, that led to the Reconstruction era, that led to the Harlem Renaissance, that led to the Civil Rights era. God's liberating reign has certainly become large enough that the birds of the air can make nests in its shade.
Amen.
Who would have thought? A few escaped slaves. And here we are today. We got a long way to go, of course. I think something similar happened with the murder of George Floyd. What a horrible, horrible event, if you watch that video. Horrible. And yet, out of something so horrible, this Black Lives Matter movement, which had already begun, just started exploding. Awareness of police brutality, awareness of racism embedded throughout society, not just in policing, but everywhere. It's coming to the surface.
Yes, hallelujah.
Out of this little seed of one tortured, murdered human being.
Amen.
I think that's a modern day parable. I would also like to tell you another modern day parable about the youth of this congregation. I know we don't see a whole lot sitting in here today, but some of the youth in this congregation have not grown up with all the resources that they could ever ask for. Some have done the best they can. And I see when we do the Jennifer Britton scholarships every year, just how good some of those youth are doing. Today, one of our youth, Kayla McClendon, is graduating from St. Sabina School. You'll see that in the announcements in the bulletin. And is also the valedictorian of her class. That is a modern day parable.
Yes.
And I'll tell you one more personal story. You know, I had never even worshipped in the black church until Reverend Jacques Conway and I got appointed to St. Matthew over in Cabrini Green in 2013. Now, I grew up, you don't move, you don't make a sound, you know, the frozen chosen, right? Well, the first time I went to worship in the black church, and I heard folks shouting. What is this? Blew my mind. That's where I learned how to preach. And you know, the first time I got up to preach, I had my sermon on note cards. I got up and dropped them all over the floor. First thing I did was drop them all over the floor. Folks said, don't worry about it, just go with the Spirit. I'm not quite there yet. I picked them all up, put them back in order. Sorry, folks, sorry, folks. First time preaching in front of folks. Of course I looked like a fool. Got him back together, dropped him again. And gave up. Bought an iPad so that I could kind of do it electronically going forward. Now, which I use to record these services and put them out on the internet. Now, how is it that this farm boy from Redneck, Indiana, who grew up in Redneck, Southern Illinois, came to Chicago, went to seminary, became a pastor, served a very wealthy congregation in Glenview, served a very wealthy congregation in Naperville, and then served this very poor congregation in St. Matthew. And yet, that was the most fired up group of folks I had ever worshiped with. It blew my mind. I didn't know folks could worship that way. And of course, it's taken years. What's it been? 8 years since I've been involved with the Black Church. That's not all that long. So, I'm sure throughout your lifetimes, you've heard how many sermons about oppression. And in how many of those sermons did the oppressor look like me? I'd say a lot of them.
Most of them.
And not enough.
That look like us.
But here I am. Why would God have me here? Trying to tell you something as if you don't already know what it is that I'm talking about. God works in ways that just don't make sense to me. And the parables, we can't explain. I just kind of keep on parabolizing. Because the kingdom is about love. It's not about violence. It's not about hate. It's not about be on your best behavior in church or you are going to get it when we get home. Now, I know a few of us have heard that, not just folks in the white church. The parables, the reversals, they're everywhere. One final parable I want to leave you with. And this, I call the Grilling for Jesus parable, which we started last summer on Thursdays. Just setting up. I love to grill. And so we just started setting up and grilling and giving out food to the neighborhood. It was a good time. It created some goodwill on one corner. Now, imagine a small congregation on a small corner in a big city with what, 30 people shot over the weekend? What if, starting with this little mustard seed of a corner, we create some goodwill, and somebody comes and gets a hot dog and says thank you, and goes and says a positive word to somebody else who might have been thinking about hurting another person, right? Little by little by little. It's not going to be overnight that the city of Chicago will be free of racism, free of violence, and fully integrated in all the neighborhoods. That won't happen in our lifetime. But imagine the power of those little seeds. Remember those little seeds that turned into the great big trees? What if we are one of those little seeds? And what if God's love just keeps growing and growing and growing, so this little corner of goodwill turns into peace throughout the city? That's how Jesus works. We don't see it coming. But the reversals happen. And things that, big programs, you know how many big high-money church growth programs I've seen? And you know how many I choose to follow? I think it's, what's your name? Your story. Just get to know somebody. Before you try showing off being a real Christian, let's just try being a real person.
Yeah.
Let's just love. Let's just let love be that factor that drives us. Because the more we do it, the more we see through eyes of love, not eyes of, what can I get? And then we see the kingdom. And then we live into the kingdom. And then we forget and go off, and I go on Amazon and buy this and that and the other thing that I don't need. And then, oh yeah, financial stewardship, right? Gotta pay my time. Send it in right away. Folks, God is love. God gives growth. And that love has been pouring out since time immemorial and will continue pouring out until the end of time.
Yes.
When Jesus returns and we all sit down and feast at the table together. May it be so. Amen.
Amen.